Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do join. For today's patron shout out, I'd like to thank RP Zuli for being a patron. I can't thank you enough for your support.
The world you play, I don't want to set the world on fire.
Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today in Pub Stomp MTG, and this is another deck upgrade video for another Fallout deck, and today we're going to go over the Mutant Menace. And this honestly is my most anticipated one, mainly because of the wacky creature mutants that we can see in this Precon, and boy did not disappoint. And so I'm very excited for this deck. There's a lot of fun and very flavorful things that you can find in this deck too, all like with all the previous Fallout decks. However, this is by far my favorite one. Just looking at the contents of the deck, whether you're talking about the reprints, the fun new cards, there's a lot of things to offer for this. And so diving into this deck, there are two commanders of the deck. The first commander is the Wise Mothman. This was already previously previewed, so for one black, blue, and a green, it's an insect mutant. It does have flying, and when it does enter the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Whenever one of our non-land cards are milled, you put X11 counters on each up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So this is a pretty interesting commander. It really focuses on the +1/+1 counters and the sub-theme of milling your opponents, giving those rad counters to them so that they have to mill more and take life. And so this one is pretty powerful out of the box. However, personally, I like the secondary commander a little bit better. I might make a separate deck tech video of the master. So this does have some applicability for CDH. Honestly, this is a really cool card and a great concept for a CDH commander. But this could be a really good casual commander for your deck, so let's read what he does. So for one black, green, and a blue, when he does enter the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. So very different from the Wise Mothman. Instead of giving every opponent 1 rad counter, you're giving a specific opponent 2 rad counters, which can be pretty good in some instances. The master does also have the ability, tapping him, to put a target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3. So this is pretty sweet. You can use a lot of ETB strategies, whether you are basically putting it to your own deck or if somebody else is milling. You can tap this at any time. It doesn't say at sorcery speed, which honestly, thank you, it didn't say sorcery speed. So I feel like overall, if you had to choose a commander, either one is good for the deck because it does go into the rad counter theme. The Wise Mothman does focus more on buffing your creatures, which can be really good with a lot of the proliferate stuff. And the master is definitely more about stealing your opponent's creatures and turning them into his own mutant army. So both are pretty rad, and I feel like both can be great commanders of the deck. So with all this said, now let's dive into the new cards of the deck. And diving right into it, there's a lot of fun cards that I do want to highlight. A really good utility option in the deck is Rampaging Yao Goi. You can pay X into this and triple green. It does have vigilance and trample with a 2/2 body. It does enter the battlefield with X11 counters on it based off the amount you paid into X. It also does enter the battlefield, destroy any number of target artifacts or enchantments with total mana value X or less. So basically, you can put a big giant bear on the battlefield and destroy a bunch of artifacts or enchantments based off of how much you pay into this. So this is neat, and honestly, the art looks pretty terrifying too. Speaking of which, I do also want to highlight Lumbering Mega Sloth. And this, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the first sloth we've ever seen in Magic the Gathering. Hopefully more will come because honestly, they're adorable. Maybe not this one so much because it looks like it could rip your face off. But it is a huge card, being an 8/8 with trample, and it enters the battlefield tap. But most importantly, this is like a Galta effect. Based off the amount of counters you do have, this can be reduced. So you can go tall with this. You could also go wide with Watchful Ragstag. This does have a really good ability of evolve, and whenever it does evolve, you create a token that's a copy of it. So this in a way feels like Scoot Swarm. If you don't know Scoot Swarm, it's an infamous card that I absolutely hate. But you really can overwhelm the board the more big creatures you do put on the battlefield that have bigger toughness and power than the Watchful Ragstag. And the more you make and another creature enters the battlefield with higher power and toughness, the more you will make on top of that. One of my favorite cards I do want to highlight, more for the art, is Alpha Deathclaw. This is one of the scariest things that I've ever encountered in the Fallout games. So let's read what it does. So for 4 black and a green, it's a Menace trample, and when it enters the battlefield or becomes monstrous, destroy target permanent. Also, you can pay 5 black and a green to make monstrosity 4. So this can be really abusable with a lot of different flicker strategies, and honestly a lot of these cards in this deck have a lot of great synergy with entering the battlefield. But what's nice is the versatility of this. You can destroy any permanent on the battlefield, whether it's a Gaia's Cradle, a Rhystic Study, a Smothering Tide, or a big giant scary threat. This can do it all. There are also some great spells in the deck like Atomize and Mutational Advantage. Atomize for instant speed can destroy any target non-land permanent, and you get a Proliferate. So this is just another versatile spell that you can use in your arsenal, that you could get rid of an enchantment, a creature, or even an artifact or any other permanent that's on the battlefield that's not a land. Plus you get a Proliferate 1/1 counters. You could also proliferate rad counters. So this one is very good. And with Mutational Advantage, instead of trying to destroy like Atomize is trying to protect, permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, so very similar to Heroic Intervention, but it does have the added text prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn, and you get a Proliferate. To give you my general opinion, this is pretty good. These are very familiar to some other spells that you can see, like Mutational Advantage being another Heroic Intervention, but it does have the added text of Proliferation, and that's very good, especially in this kind of deck where you want to proliferate all sorts of counters. There are also some pretty fun legendaries that I did want to point out in this deck, like Hancock Ghoulish Mayor. So for 2 and a black, each other creature you control that's a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on Hancock Ghoulish Mayor. On top of that, he does have Undying, so in a way you kind of want to sacrifice him so that he returns with a 1/1 counter on him. Plus when you do put that 1/1 counter on it, this basically just acts as an anthem for all your zombies or mutants on the battlefield. And the more you do proliferate with the counters on Hancock, the bigger the army you will have. Another great legendary is Agent Frank Horrigan. I love this card so much, I actually made a deck tech before the full spoilers came out. If you do want to go check that out, I'll post the link above. But for 5 black and a green, it does have trample and it does have indestructible as long as it attacks this turn. But most importantly, whenever it does attack or enter the battlefield, you proliferate twice. So this will be extremely powerful, especially if you do abuse some flicker strategies. When it does enter the battlefield, you will proliferate twice. So if you do have a lot of rad counters on your opponents, you can just proliferate them even more, and you can just put more 1/1 counters on your own creatures that have them. Again, I don't want to bring this up, but I don't need to highlight this one too much because I made a full video on this. Again, if you really think this is a cool commander, go ahead and check that video out. Though this is a pretty sweet commander, it's not my favorite card of the entire deck. The favorite card I would say is Screeching Scorchbeast. This is just seriously cool. Let's read what it does before I give you my thoughts. So for 4 and 2 black, it's a creature, bat, mutant. It does have flying and menace, so double evasion essentially. Whenever it does attack, each player gets 2 rad counters. It does have the ability, whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you may create that many 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens. Do this only once each turn. So the biggest thing I do want to highlight about this card is the fact is you may create that many 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens. You may. You don't have to make those tokens at that time. You could decide to mill somebody later on to make that much more tokens. Let's just go to a hypothetical situation. Say for example it is your turn. Then you have 2 rad counters. You mill 2 cards and lose 2 life. Potentially 2 non-land cards enter the graveyard. And Screeching Scorchbeast does trigger. However, you don't have to make those tokens. Because you realize you have a maddening cacophony in your hand. You can make each opponent mill half their library rounded up if you pay into that kicker cost. With that, Screeching Scorchbeast will trigger again, and then you get to make that much tokens however non-land cards your opponent's milled. And so let's just say each opponent mills 30 non-land cards. You get to make 90 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens. That's pretty insane. So yeah, this is pretty good. Also, this will trigger on any turn, not just your own, so that by itself is very good too. So honestly, there's a lot of things going for this card. I absolutely love it. Now that I've talked about some of the new cards in the deck, I do want to talk about the reprints. Alright, so I'm over here on MTG Goldfish and just looking over the deck list, and honestly there's a lot of good reprints. Again, kind of like I talked about previously with some of the other deck upgrades. There's more focus on a lot of new cards compared to a lot of the reprints. Besides that point, there is a lot of fun reprints. A lot of them are in the enchantments. For example, Hardening Scales is really good in that really cool art. Just making more 1/1 counters on your guys can be very good. Branching Evolution takes that a step further and basically doubling them. Guardian Project, especially with the Master in that art, is breathtaking. And honestly, a really good card draw outlet, especially when you have 28 creatures in the deck. You can draw a lot of cards basically replacing those creatures that you put on the battlefield. Also, we do have Inexorable Tide. What a breathtaking looking piece of art with that Deathclaw in the background and all the mist in there. Nesting Grounds is also a very good one. Again, I like the fact that with all these precons that are Universes Beyond, they kind of make their own art that fit into that universe. With the Nesting Ground, it does have that Hornet. And honestly, this is just a great one in any counters deck. I do run in my Blue and Owen deck, and it's perfect in there. Winding Constrictor is another great reprint. I do believe they have new art for it. I just, only on MTG Goldfish, it just shows the regular art. But this is another one where it basically gets more counters to your creatures that are already putting 1/1 counters on themselves. And I do also want to point out Casualty of Wars. I'll put it up on the screen, but I do have to talk about this art because this is probably one of the best art pieces I've ever seen in Magic the Gathering. Maybe not one of the best art because I don't want to overhype it for myself, and so yeah, very welcome reprint. Honestly, I hate playing against this card because it just destroys so much stuff on the board. But again, that flavor text and the art, everything about it is honestly beautiful. Farseek is another great reprint, usually always very welcome. But overall, you do have a little bit of stuff here and there that support the synergy with proliferating and also the 1/1 counter synergies. I mean, there's also Corpse Jack Menace, which is very similar to Branching Evolution, where you're doubling the amount of 1/1 counters that you put on creatures. So this does have a lot of synergy with each other, probably a better synergy than some of the other precons. So now with that, let's dive into some of the cards that I would upgrade in the box. So I will be quite honest, this one was a weird one to upgrade. There's a lot of interesting avenues you can go through. I decided to use more proliferate cards. So for example, Ripples of Potential is a great card. For 1 in a blue, proliferate, then choose any number of permanents you control that had a counter put on them. This way, those permanents phase out. So this is just a great protection spell, especially with your cards that have counters on them. So that's the main reason why I wanted to use Ripples of Potential in this deck. Another card I do want to highlight is Bloated Contaminator. This is just a big beefy creature that you can swing with, and then it does have Toxic, but that's not the main use for using this. We are focusing more on dealing damage to proliferate so that we can make sure those rad counters keep coming to our opponents. Another way we can proliferate is using Vraska Betrayal Sting. I love this card so much in any kind of deck that you're using counters. She has that 0 ability of you draw a card and you lose 1 life and you proliferate. You could also basically add a counter to Vraska too. So it technically feels like a +1 even though it's a 0 ability. She does also have that other ability with -2 making a creature into a treasure token. So basically like a Gorgon turning something into stone. They will be able to use that treasure token, but if you're getting rid of a big pesky creature, that's an upside for sure. And I guess in a way the -9 can be a game-winning ability if you use it on one opponent, but I really love this for that first ability, drawing a card and proliferating. That's what we want to do in this deck. We can even go further with proliferation using Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus. For 4 mana, if you would proliferate twice instead, that's perfect. Of course, we do have a lot of proliferators in this deck. Just having the ability to double these abilities is going to be pretty crazy. Also, ironically, Vorinclex is in the image of Tekuthal, and that's what we're going to be speaking about next, is Vorinclex himself. This is literally quite insane in this deck. This has so much value, just besides being a big giant beater. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, twice that many of each of those kind of counters on that permanent or player are put instead. I know this is probably one of the pricier ones I would talk about today, but if you do really want to boost the power level of your deck, this is a great option in the deck. Since we are kind of in a mill theme, milling all our opponents, we could also take advantage of the graveyard. Some ways we could do that is by using creatures that get even bigger with bigger graveyards. So we can use some of the Goyfs like Urborg Lurgoyf, Scrounging Deathclaw, which is a reskin basically of Tarmogoyf, and Necrogoyf. So each of these in their own way do get buffed up basically by the more cards that are in your opponent's graveyard and your own graveyard too. The most notable one is Tarmogoyf. Unfortunately, Power Creep kind of pushed it out of Modern, but it can be pretty decent in here and honestly not bad of price too. Another similar version of this kind of effect is using a card like Lord of Extinction. I love this card a lot, even though it definitely went down in price for sure, which I'm all about. But its power and toughness are equal to all number of cards in all graveyards, so if everybody has like 10 cards in their graveyard, this is going to be a 40-40. I don't know, for me personally, I love using this card. I do have it in my Zeatora deck where I fling this card for a huge amount of damage at one opponent. But in this deck, with everybody getting milled with radiation counters everywhere when we proliferate them even further, this card can get get really crazy. Another way we can take advantage of graveyards is using reanimation cards like, well, reanimate. You will lose life in the process when you do reanimate a card, especially if it's bigger, but that's completely okay because if you get the biggest and best creature from a graveyard, anybody's graveyard, you are most likely going to get ahead of the train. Plus, this did just get reprinted in the previous set with Murders at Karlov Manor, so maybe it's cheap, maybe it's not, we'll find out. A bigger version of reanimate that I do want to focus on is Rise of the Dark Realms. This was also another reprint in one of those decks in Murders at Karlov Manor. I want to say the Demir one, but this is just a game-ending spell you could absolutely take advantage of in this deck because everybody's getting milled. You could just put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. So this is just easily one way where you could just add a nice simple win con, just reanimating everything, put them on your graveyard, then swing in the next turn. Plus this did get a lot cheaper, so definitely one to pick up for sure. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on upgrading the Mutant Menace. Again, this is probably my favorite Precon out of the entire series of Fallout, but I would like to hear from you. What are your thoughts and opinions about this deck? Which deck is your favorite out of the series? And with all that said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.